Hello, dearest ones. If you feel nervous about putting your work out there, or if you've got a crow sitting on your shoulder telling you what a terrible writer you are, then today's conversation is just for you. I'm talking to writer and coach Jerry Colonna, whose recent book, Reboot: Leadership and the Art of Growing Up, talks about how he has begun to realize that those critical voices, the ones whispering that we are no good, are ironically meant to soothe us and keep us safe. So let's dive into a conversation that I have been looking forward to for a really long time. Jerry, welcome to the broadcast studio, and thank you so much for being here with me.
Oh, thanks for having me. And I really appreciate the opportunity to just be together and in particular talk about the art of being ourselves, if you will.
Yeah, like that to me seemed like a really great jumping off point. I love the way that you describe or you use that word alchemy. So I'd love to really start there. When someone's thinking about how they might start showing up online, and of course, my audience, they're creators. And so what they're providing is art of some kind. So they're leading in their providing of that art. So I'd love for you to talk about how that alchemy might help them show up as a leader, but within their creative expression.
Well, I chose that word alchemy, and I've kind of been fascinated by that word for years because it brings to mind the alchemist, right? And if we recall what an alchemist did, they would turn base metals into gold. They would turn lead into gold. And of course, none of us consist of lead. We're all gold. And our thoughts and our wishes and dreams, they're all golden, but we don't perceive them that way. We perceive them as lead. And so there's a magical alchemical process that's behind all of this that is an essential part of that process of becoming ourselves. Once we realize the gold was there all along, then we're liberated.
Yeah. It seems to me that it really touches on the idea of how we see ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really interested in how you feel about the ways that we become quite fixed in the way that we might see ourselves as led, almost to the point that if someone's trying to point out the gold within us, we're like, we don't quite believe it. It
Mm-hmm.
might be that we say to someone, oh, I'm really not sure about my writing. And the friend says, no, you're a really great writer. And maybe for an afternoon, we can believe it. Like we can sort of take on that golden perspective. But then slowly that, the heaviness of like, no, I don't believe them. Or it's so much, it seems safer to be convinced that we're actually led. What do
Well,
you?
I think you just hit the nail on the head. I think that mechanism that we have of diminishing ourselves is a misguided attempt to keep ourselves safe, in this case from humiliation or shame,
Yeah.
right? The last thing we want to have happen now is we put something out into the world and our nightmare is that the world looks at us and says, who are you to put something out into the world? Go back into your little corner there. And I say it's misguided because, I wrote about this a little bit in the book when I talked about the crow who sits on your shoulder telling you what a terrible writer you are, or telling you, what a terrible person you are. When I realized that the purpose of that was to keep me safe, it altered the frame of the relationship with it, not as something that I have to push back on or disagree with, but something that I have to simply love into a peaceful state of coexistence. And so I'm working on a new book now, and I write during the weekends because during the week my schedule is quite full. And it's an interesting process because it gives me time to process what it was that I just wrote, right? So this past weekend I was writing, and it was a pretty powerful experience. At the end of the weekend, though, usually around Sunday night, my life partner, Allie, will say to me, "Are we a good writer today or a bad writer?" Right? Because, and it's our gentle, joking way of just being in relationship with that part of ourselves, the part of me that writes a sentence and says, "What are you thinking? That's absurd." Or the part of me that will, put aside my own work for a moment and read some extraordinary work, and then tell myself I'll never be able to do that. And ironically, sometimes the extraordinary work I read is something that I've written before. So, 2 weeks ago, I was on the phone with my agent talking about the new book that I'm working on. And I said, "Jim, I don't know. I just can't do it. I can't do what I did in the first book." And he starts laughing and laughing. I said, "What? You've heard this from other authors?" And he said, "I heard this from you 3 months ago. I heard this from you 6 months ago. Stop it. Just get back to writing." And so, anyways, a long-winded way of saying I know those feelings quite well and still have those feelings.
And isn't it interesting that we can have a moment where we express something that we've expressed 3 months before or 6 months before, and then this interesting forgetting occurs.
Mm.
You talk about seeing through illusions and delusions in Reboot,
Mhm.
and it seems to me that every day, I mean, certainly with my own meditation practice, it's literally just a case of resetting and reminding. There's
Mhm.
the place that my mind automatically switches into, which is let's be afraid of everything
Mhm.
and let's just keep ourselves safe.
Right.
It would be happy if I didn't even leave the house. And so it's like a constant reminder to say, no, I want to show up in the world. I
Right.
want to lead a movement.
Right.
But where does it
Yeah.
start? You talk about love. I'm just wondering, it's about reminding ourselves, but also how do we even know how to love ourselves? You talk about humor as well, your life
Mm.
partner kind of bringing in the humor. There seems to be such an importance about love and humor in this work.
Mhm. Yeah. Humor as an expression of love, right? Um, you asked two questions in a sense. One was, where does it start? And the other was, how does love sort of interact with that?
Mm.
I think it starts, you used the word hypervigilant before we started recording. And as you know from my book, that's a descriptor that I use about myself. And it's, that hypervigilance began as a protection move as a child to ward off the consequences of my mother's mental illness or my father's alcoholism, and to be able to navigate to a safer space. So, where do such things start? They start where they always start, in the beginning. If anything, they might start, as the brilliant psychologist Mark Lynn writes in his book, "It Didn't Start With You."
Mm.
It may have begun in previous generations, right? So this fear that you speak about yourself, you probably came by it honestly, meaning it was probably handed to you as a means of keeping you safe. And it came to you passed down from the lineage, from the generations. Um, and seeing it that way, I think it's possible to invoke the love. It's
Mm.
possible, for example, to then look back at ancestors and say, well, what were they doing? Oh, they were not only trying to keep themselves safe, but they were trying to keep their descendants safe. Well, that's interesting. What if we're already safe? What if we could turn back to those ancestors and say, in effect, I got it. We're okay. I really appreciate your whispering to me that I have to be careful, but I'm an adult and I can cross the street without holding your hand and I can make it to the other side. If we do that work, and that work I would say is part of the subset of the work of growing up, we have the extraordinary opportunity to break a lineage pattern. And we get to turn to our descendants, if we're so lucky to have descendants, and say, there's a different way. Yes, the world is scary, but you can leave the house and you can cross the street and it's going to be okay.
The phrase break a lineage pattern is so powerful, Jerry. And when I really absorb what you're saying, this idea of it, something being handed down to us, what came to me as I was listening to you is we're handed down this, let's call it this fear. We're handed down this fear by a lineage that says, hey, this kept us safe, so we're going to give it to you. But what we're not handed is a new way of having relationship with that fear. And it seems to me that it's the relationship that's being called to change. And there has to be some level of consciousness now to navigate that relationship, to navigate us free from the patterns and habits that are, it's almost like our body just holds into a new way of being, and holding this fear that is going to enable us to elevate onto a different level of consciousness.
It's not like the body holds. It is that the body holds, right? That's the body keeps score. And that transformation that you're talking about, you know, we're handed the lineage belief system. In my book, I call it subroutines, but we're handed these belief systems that kept our ancestors safe. And you're right, we're not handed the context. We're just handed the belief system. So for example, you know, we might have ancestors who suffered famine, okay? And the belief system might get transformed into a kind of greedy hoarding of resources as a consequence of that. When we look back with love and we see that they were starving, and that the only way they can make sense of the world was to see the world as this awful place, to be guarded against, to be hoarded, and you know, protected in that way. All of a sudden, we can do the magical alchemy of transforming that base lead into something extraordinarily golden, which is an awareness that when we encounter someone who is what we might describe as greedy, that we may be seeing famine, or we may be seeing fear, or we may be seeing trauma. And that's the alchemical process that transforms our experience of being human.
There seems to me, when someone may identify with being creative or being an artist or being a writer, there's something about that creative urge that I've come to understand is a call to be free of what's being handed down. And we get a sense of it triggers our fear, because it triggers that fear earlier on of being seen and what will people think. But it's also, by acting on that urge, it seems to be the way to be free of it as well. So this is why, to me, this idea of being a leader and being a creator seemed to have come into a real dance together, as I think about what's being taught to people about how they can show up and lead others, and how that can really relate to someone who wants to be an artist and want to be seen and develop a following around their work. I want to play this little video here, which again, it's another quote from your book, which to me just seems to really speak about that threshold moment when we go from feeling that creative urge to perhaps liberating ourselves from this lineage. So let me just pop the video on and then we can chat about it. To me, that phrase, Jerry, I come back to it in your book and I can feel the lump in my throat now. It speaks to me so deeply that there is this pain of emerging as a creator. And yet that pain is also the indication to me that I'm coming close to freedom. So I'd love for you to talk more about that existential pain. Like, I know that you've obviously experienced it too, to be able to articulate it so exquisitely.
Oh, thank you. I don't think it's just it's the pain of becoming a creator. I think it's the pain of becoming human. We do a number on ourselves when we touch into that pain. And the number we do on ourselves is the false belief that we're the only one who has been wounded. When we understand that the process of separation, even from our birth mother, is a form of wounding, because we step away from the oceanic feeling of merged and connected. And we're thrust into a world where we're undeniably alone. There's a wounding. And then when that experience is merged with the lineage, a lineage that might question our worthiness, our question to feel loved and be able to love, our ability to feel worthy and to feel safe, and ultimately to feel and that we belong and to whom we belong. That is part of the process of becoming whatever it is that we are. When we see that is not evidence of our lack of worthiness, but in fact, confirmation of our humanity, it transforms the entire process. It's more of that alchemical process. I hurt because I'm human. It's quite different than I hurt because I'm broken.
Yeah.
Right. And so, you pause, you read that sentence, it touches someplace deep inside of you. That tells me, that confirms for me what I knew to be true to begin with, which is that you and I are connected in this great, great, magical experience of being humans together. Oh, you too hurt. Okay. Let's be wounded together. Rather than act out aggressively the consequences of our wounding, can we reach deep inside and find something golden in that wound?
As I listen to you talk about this idea of the connecting between two people, or you're feeling that pain and being able to experience the humanness rather than the separation of, oh, there's something wrong with me and therefore I need to isolate, perhaps. It makes me think about, and I own this myself, the journey of being a creator who is looking for an audience, or a leader who's looking for people to follow, who unconsciously may be being driven by the wound. And I've experienced this myself, we find ourselves in a place where the results that we're creating as an artist or as a leader are simply showing us the wound that we're not able to see. And there can be something so shameful when we're in this experience of like, it's not working for me. And yet, a little bit like what you were talking about earlier, there can just be this huge healing when we come into a place of honesty and say, okay, this is my trauma. And the alchemy happens. But I'd love for you to speak to someone who may be in that position of they're creating or they're trying to lead, but it feels like they're hitting up against something and they're not yet able to understand that that is a beautiful lesson that's being given to them.
How about I speak to you instead?
Beautiful.
Okay. I don't know if you noticed, but I picked up a pen and I wrote when you started talking. And the trigger point for me was, and I own this. Do you remember saying that?
Yeah.
All right. Tell me what "and I own this" means. What
Mm.
did you mean by that phrase?
When I come into a place where I might be teaching others, so I might be teaching about building an audience online, as part of my job.
Sure.
For me, I recognize that I'm drawn to teach others experiences or lessons that I feel I've had or that I'm currently going through. I try to be as close to what I'm going through when I'm teaching it, rather than, I don't know, I suppose teach something and give the sense of like, oh, I'm totally good with this. Like it's never an issue for me. So when I say I own this, I suppose every day there's always some kind of result that I think with my business that I think, this is teaching me something. This is teaching me that I'm still worried about what people think, or this is teaching me something. This is teaching me that I'm still going after the money, and the lessons are softer. The lessons are a lot softer than they were a few years ago. Makes me think of the roller coaster that you talk about. So yes, I've gone from just, having these lessons and I suppose shaking my fist at them to sort of, just getting a lesson like a little nudge, like, yeah, you're right. I just got off a sales call. It felt icky. I wasn't present. Yeah, I see that. I'm going to own that. So yeah, so that's what I meant when I raised my hand.
And if I can probe a little bit, what is the voice inside of your head saying to you if you don't own it? Yeah, right there.
Interestingly, there's a real peace. I don't know what to make of that, Jerry. There's no voice. When I just looked within, I was asking the question, what if I don't own this? And there was just a real sense of relief.
So what I think I'm sensing, which is why this is my hypervigilance, right? I don't even remember your first question. I just got fixated on I own this. What I think I'm sensing is an echo of an old belief system, which is, who are you to tell other people when you, in fact, struggle with these very things. And all of the shame that that voice is carrying. And then I think what happened, I think it's an echo, because when you actually turn towards that, it disappeared. And so what we may be seeing is a habit that's left over from the old pattern, an old pattern that may have stopped you from writing in the first place, stopped you from creating, stopped you from being you, for fear of running into that voice. And now what happens is, just in that pause, we turn to that voice and we say, what do you have to say? And then it disappears. Do you remember in the book, I tell the story about Milarepa, the Buddhist saint?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the story is that Milarepa, who's very famous for his songs, but also for being a meditation master, had spent 20 years meditating in a cave. And one day he leaves the cave to gather firewood, and he comes back and the cave is filled with demons. And he starts doing what we would normally do in those circumstances. He starts chasing them. Get out of the cave. Get out, get out, get out. And he's running around. And I always think of them as tiny little children flying around with wings and stuff like that. And what happens is that none of the demons leave. So then he says, and he gets very, very clever. And he says, aha, I will teach you the Dharma. I will teach you how to be a creator. And he gets all positive psychology. And he starts teaching the Dharma. And all the demons sit still and they listen carefully. But they don't leave. So then he says to the demons, well, what are you here to teach me? We're getting closer. And one by one, the demons start to disappear. Mm-hmm. But still there's one remaining demon. And this is the scariest, most fearsome, blood-curdling demon imaginable. And to that one, he says, he puts his head up to the mouth of the demon and he says, eat me if you wish. And then the demon disappears. And do you see the parallel here? Mm. When we put ourselves in a position to be in service to others, when we put ourselves in a position either to lead or to write or to tell stories or to put ourselves to merge the wounds of our childhood into something creative, we're kind of like Milarepa. Mm-hmm. Especially as we have this sort of, let's call it the first layers of consciousness, where we end up, what are you here to teach me? Which is a great question, but it's not sufficient. That's the lesson of that last demon. What is sufficient is that we turn towards the demon and we explore, what is this about? You know what? You want to eat me? Be my guest. Do your worst. And then the demon disappears. And that last movement, that takes courage. So I projected a little bit into the experience that you were having. That's what my heart was seeing. Does that have any resonance for you?
I love this, Jerry, because it does come so into an experience that I've been having where I'm drawn to lead. I'm drawn to lead through my art, my writing. And I feel that there is something inside me asking to do it differently. There is something inside me saying, you see how coaches lead, you see how coaches grow their business, and I want to do that, but I want to do it differently. And interestingly, when I read your book, I was in the forest. I went for 2 weeks into the forest over Christmas because I understood that if I wanted to lead differently, if I wanted to do this work as a creator differently, I would have to find a different teacher. And so I went to the forest because I decided that trees were going to be my teacher. They were going to teach me how to lead, because I knew that a tree wasn't going to teach me about marketing. So this journey here, where I put my hand up and I say, I can talk right now about the truth of where I am on my journey, or I can provide content that maybe inspires people. Like, the two seem to be so important. And I'm trying to navigate that line to say, I want you to see into me. I want you to see what trauma I'm with today, but I also want to be able to see it enough so that I can lead other people.
What did you learn in the forest?
There were a few things, but one profound experience came to me, and you said the words earlier as we've been chatting, as I sat beneath a tree and I felt what it was teaching me. It's not that I hear anything. It's not that I get a voice in my head saying, speak to this person or do this thing. When I sit with trees, I simply get an emotional or energetic feeling, and an understanding comes from that. And there was one afternoon where I sat with a tree and I had just a total visceral understanding that I was safe. And somebody may listen to that and it may not resonate with them, but for me it came.
What's going on right there? What's going on right there? Somebody may listen to that and it may not resonate. What was that voice? I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. It was a voice asking, will someone understand this?
What if they don't? Yeah.
It's a desire that I can pass the experience that I got on from the trees, and I suppose, and not knowing how to. If I sit by a tree and experience this unbelievable emotional frequency that makes me feel an unbelievable amount of self-love, the voice then says, but how can I give this to other people? How will they understand?
What if you can't? What if they can't? Stay with that spot. Turn towards that demon.
I just feel a real calming here. Like when you said turn to that spot, I could hear how much need there was here to just like, got to do it, got to do it, got to do it. And then when I brought my attention here, it was just, don't got to do it.
It is a lovely experience. It's an extraordinary experience to put our work into the world and have it received and understood, and to know that it moves people. I understand that. Just this morning I was responding to 2 emails I received in the last 24 hours from 2 young men who both said, in effect, thank you. You've shown me something that I needed to see. And I won't deny that it energizes me and it lifts me up. And there's a tension spot that can exist where I am so drawn to doing that that I actually stop myself from being myself. the experience that you had sitting with that tree, Buddha-like, because of course he sat under the Buddha tree. No one can take that away from you, even if no one ever understands it. Know the Buddha story. The Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree. And the way I like to think of it is, after years and years of trying everything else, he just sort of said, fuck it, I'm just going to sit under this tree until I figure it out. He came to realize the Four Noble Truths. Life is filled with suffering. That which we do to push away suffering increases suffering. Suffering can stop. And then the Eightfold Path of the way in which suffering stops. His students came to him and they saw a changed visage. They saw a change come over him. And they said, "Oh, Master, tell us what you have learned." And he was silent. And he put his hand down in what's called the earth-touching mudra, which is this movement where he's got his hand. You often see it in statues. And what he's saying is, I cannot express in words the experience that I had, but the earth is the witness to my change. That to me is liberation. That is to have the experience that is yours to have, whether or not it's understood, appreciated, it moves them. And this is hard. We live in a hard world. As creators, we want publishers, we want editors, we want books to be sold, we want to be in a bestseller list, and we do the work anyway.
Yeah. That piece actually about the ground being the witness or the earth being the witness, that's a new ingredient to me, because yes, as I was listening to you, there was a little voice saying, "Oh, Jerry, I know this irony, come on, like give me something else, give me something else. I know about, catching yourself when you're experiencing the pleasure of a compliment, noticing when you start to." I was like, come on, Jerry, I need something else. I need something else. The earth as witness. I mean, I love the way that feels. And then it's so interesting to notice my mind immediately come in straight away and be like, oh, right, let's write a LinkedIn post about this. This would be really useful information to share.
Yeah, it's you want to slip some ground right beneath it and then move on. Okay, got it. Next. Right. Beautiful. I love the fact that you saw the whole experience for you there. That to me is an expression of the consciousness that you were speaking about before. It's not to stop the subroutines, the lineage, the movements that we do to keep ourselves. It's not to stop them from arising, but it's to allow them to arise, to turn towards them, to then have them disappear so that we can then turn towards the thing that remains, the earth, our own sense of ourselves, the unshakable belief that I am worthy, regardless of whether or not anyone ever appreciates that which I create.
That phrase, the turning towards the thing that remains, and that being the earth. There was another experience. This is on a separate occasion when I was sitting with a tree, and I was sitting there and I was having this experience with the tree, and my mind was trying to figure it out. You know, what's this that's coming to me? I could feel a little bit like wind blowing through me, the physical sensation that you might experience if that wind literally did come through the skin and into the body, and then it was going out the other side. And to me, in that moment, it felt like a wonderful teaching about the present moment. And it was showing me that whenever I experience the bliss of the present moment, I grab it.
And concretize it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then as I was sitting with the tree, it was the very first time that I had ever experienced the present moment in motion. I think up until that point, I'd been like, in meditation, my mind is silent, my body is full of euphoric energy, and then it goes.
Yay! And then it's gone. Right.
But sitting in the tree, I was like, I get it. It's because every single time I've been like, I'm there, grab it, think about it, look at it, rather than just feel it as this constant. And so when you talked about looking at the earth as the thing that remains, that really spoke to me, and how, like, I kind of gave another layer to that experience. I was like, I get it. The present moment keeps moving. The earth always remains. It's the only thing that can be the witness, I suppose.
The earth is large enough to contain us all. And that's both a scientific fact and an extraordinary metaphor for what we're talking about. The earth is large enough to contain it all.
Yeah.
And I'm reminded of the observation that I've often made, which is that the best way to see a shooting star is to relax your gaze. Because when we stare intently to catch a shooting star, we miss them.
Yeah.
You know, the same is true with the wishes and dreams we have, you know, in our process of becoming adults, right? I want to be free of suffering. I'm going to hold tightly to that. And that's actually not what the wisdom traditions teach. It's actually to turn towards the suffering, to turn towards the struggle. And it's that turning towards, with the ability to touch the earth, that allows it to move through us, the way you so beautifully said, like the wind.
So let me come back to, you shared about the 2 emails that you'd recently received, and the pleasure of that, the pleasure of when someone does engage with your work and you get that symbol of the difference that you're making. So I'm thinking about creators watching this, and they're seeking that. They're at the place where, you know, it's like, oh, if I can just get the book deal, if I can just get someone to validate this, you know, then I'll be there. Then everything's going to be okay. I'd love for you to share your knowledge around how we can really be seeking that. I don't know, it's like a sugar high, the sugar high of, I love the work that you put out there, and what we might, you know, where we might find the earth instead to guide us through that.
Yeah, well, I'll speak to it directly in the way we connected, right? I believe you came to me via LinkedIn. And I had that sugar high of, ooh, I made a difference in somebody else's life. I must be worthy. And so my ego could have approached our conversation today from a point of view of, let me be the sage on the stage. I have the fancy microphone. My voice sounds very good, right? Yeah, it's just so freaking uninteresting. And so what was much more interesting to me was to listen to your heart, right? I would do my best to answer your questions. Useful. You said that my interview and conversation with Tim Ferriss was just really two folks being really conscious? It's because it was two friends, right? What I try to do is turn towards that person and to really listen. What is happening for that other person? You know, I have an ego just like everybody else. It takes enormous pleasure in being told, good boy, great job. But after a time, it's like sugar, it's not very nutritious, right? And so if we each can use our work as a jumping off point for empathetic connection to another human, boy, howdy, isn't that fun? It's a much better way to live. And so we'll end this conversation and hopefully you'll say, you know, Joe's my friend. And I'll say, well, Gabriella's my friend. Right? And so I see those emails and I see the connection that's possible.
Mm.
And that's a good ground from which to then move forward.
Mm. It's so special, Jerry, to have you say that. I feel that anyone who is seeking to grow an audience, a client base, if that's the only thing that drives them, that seeking of connection, it just feels like it's the best advice they could be given. You know, that's why I went to the forest instead of taking another marketing seminar, because I just thought, who's going to teach me about connection?
Yeah, it's there's an implicit message that we get from whether it's the self-help section in a bookstore or yet another training experience, and that is it can come across, which is that you're not sufficient unto yourself. Whereas if we go into those conversations with the belief that we're sufficient and we're merely curious to see what we can learn, all of a sudden the possibilities start to open up.
Yeah.
I think the best marketing, for example, is marketing that stems from an authentic place of being. You know, one of my oldest friends, no, one of my longest lived friendships, because he's not the oldest person, is Seth Godin. And, you know, I first backed Seth Godin years and years ago when I was an investor. And I don't think there's anyone I know who intuitively groks marketing better than Seth. And it's because he's just Seth. He's just Seth.
Yeah.
And all that simplicity and all that complexity and all of that loveliness. And the more he is just Seth and not trying to be Seth, the more Seth-like he is. If that makes any sense.
It does. It makes total sense. And it's, you know, it's so funny. It reminds me of how I had to end up laughing about the fact that I was finding it so difficult to
Right.
be who I am truly.
Right.
You know, it's like it's this kind of weird place.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you, so when I came across Seth, I was like, like I was so overjoyed to hear somebody talking about marketing in the way that he does. And I learned a lot about, you know, he's probably where I really first started to learn about marketing and leadership. and just really seeking to speak to just one person who was really just myself.
Mm-hmm.
I was just putting out my newsletter, putting out content, really just speaking to the Gabriella, maybe the Gabriella of yesterday, maybe the Gabriella of 10 years ago, maybe the Gabriella of right now. So here's one thing that used to come up a lot. It comes up less now. Like I see it now. It's less in the driving seat. It's kind of more of a backseat driver voice now, where I say to myself, and I suppose it comes back to what we were talking about earlier, this fear that no one will be listening, this fear of, I want to speak, I want to say something, I want to do it authentically, I want to be myself, all of these wants. And then at the end of the day, just a desire to put something out there. But then the fear that creeps in that says, what if you do all of this and still nothing?
Right. What if you have a party and no one shows up? Take pleasure in the craft.
Mm-hmm.
Take pleasure in the craft. It's a hard balancing act, but there's something extraordinary about putting together a string of words that when you're done, you look and you say, good job. That sentence is beautiful. I'm going to give you a quote. It's on my monitor, so that's why I'm looking down. Let me live, love, and say it well in good sentences. Sylvia Plath. Let me live, love, and say it well in good sentences. There's such a pleasure in the craft. Turn towards that. That is the earth.
Yeah. I feel that, Jerry. I really do. There seems to be, just as I hold that, there seems to be a real meeting in that place where whatever it is I've expressed, it's almost like what I get is this sense of like the soul, that kind of wordless place within me is experiencing a total gratitude that my mind was able to offer it the right word. It's like a meeting of the mind and the soul, and like, yay, you totally get me, but it's all internal. And in this place, I'm just like, who cares if no one reads this post? I just had this beautiful meeting.
That's right. That's right.
I love it. Jerry, this has been, I had no idea what to expect other than I knew that it was going to be real. And I feel so honored that I got some pokes from you, and you've helped me see like some really deep truths today. Thank you so much for listening and having such a wonderful gaze.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for trusting me.
I was nervous, but I wanted to come in with this. I wanted to come in with as open heart as I was able to. So just, real trusting that I was going to be safe, accepting the nerves. They were always going to be there, but to be like, don't let that close your heart. So yeah, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me.
I just want to take a moment just to see if there's anything else, just in the last minute or so, if there's anything else that you just feel to say or to share, anything that comes to you.
How about this? I'll read you something else that's on the bottom of my monitor. And the writer and naturalist Barry Lopez passed in 2021. And this is from an obituary. And he says, when asked about his motives for writing, he said, I can tell you in 2 words, to help. I am a traditional storyteller. This activity is not about yourself. It's about culture, and your job is to help. So those two quotes, Barry Lopez, Sylvia Plath, keep me going every day.